There is a certain kind of company that stops feeling like a business and starts feeling like a force of nature. It employs tens of thousands of people. It shapes entire industries. Politicians return its calls. Journalists write breathless profiles about its genius leadership. And somewhere along the way, the people inside it start to believe what everyone outside is saying, that this company is simply too big, too smart, and too important to ever fall. That belief, more than anything else, is what kills them. Enron Corporation was that company. The rise of the company that rewrote the rules Enron was born in 1985 when Kenneth Lay merged two natural gas pipeline companies, Houston Natural Gas and Internorth, into a single energy enterprise. It was a straightforward business at first, moving gas through pipes and charging fees for the service. But Kenneth Lay had larger ambitions, and when energy markets began to deregulate in the early 1990s, he saw an opportunity that most of his competitors missed entirely. He brought in a man named Jeffrey Skilling, initially as a consultant. Skilling was sharp, aggressive, and overflowing with ideas. He convinced Lay to transform Enron from a boring pipeline operator into something far more exciting, an energy trading company. Instead of just moving gas, Enron would buy and sell energy contracts, acting as the middleman between producers and buyers. It was a genuinely brilliant idea, and it worked spectacularly well at first. By the mid-1990s, Enron was dominating the energy trading market. It expanded into electricity, broadband internet services, water, and a dozen other sectors. Skilling built a culture of relentless competition inside the company, recruiting top MBA graduates from the best schools and pushing them to close deals faster than anyone thought possible. Andrew Fastow, one of Skilling's most prized hires, rose to become chief financial officer and began building increasingly complex financial structures to fund the company's explosive growth. Fortune magazine named Enron America's most innovative company 6 years in a row. Its stock price soared past $90 a share. The company was valued at roughly $68 billion at its peak in 2000, making it the seventh largest corporation in the entire United States. Ken Lay dined with presidents. Skilling graced the covers of business magazines. Enron seemed untouchable, but behind the gleaming headquarters in Houston, behind the confident earnings calls and the lavish corporate parties, something deeply rotten was taking hold. The architecture of a lethal problem with Enron's business model was that it looked far more profitable on paper than it actually was in reality. Many of the deals the company claimed to have made either weren't generating real cash or were quietly losing money. Rather than admit this to investors, the leadership chose a different path. They hid the losses. Fastow engineered a web of special-purpose entities, which were essentially off-books companies, designed to absorb Enron's bad debt without it ever appearing on the main balance sheet. These were not simple accounting maneuvers. They were sophisticated, deliberately confusing structures built to deceive. Enron used a practice called mark-to-market accounting, which allowed the company to record the projected future profits of a deal the moment it was signed, even if the actual cash would never materialize. The result was a company that looked wildly profitable while quietly hemorrhaging money in private. Arthur Andersen, one of the 5 largest accounting firms in the world, was Enron's auditor. It knew enough to ask questions. Instead, according to investigators, it helped present what one account described as a completely illusory picture of Enron's financial health to the public. Andersen was later found to have destroyed thousands of documents related to its Enron audits, an act that would ultimately cost the firm its entire existence. Inside Enron, a brutal culture had taken root. Skilling introduced a performance review system so ruthless that employees competed desperately to avoid being ranked at the bottom, knowing that ranking carried termination. The pressure to show results, regardless of whether those results were real, infected every corner of the organization. Lying in that environment wasn't a moral failing. It was survival. By August 2001, cracks were beginning to show publicly. Skilling abruptly resigned as CEO after just 6 months in the top role, citing personal reasons. It was a stunning exit that rattled investors. Lay reassured shareholders that the company had never been in better shape. He was saying this even as internal emails showed executives quietly selling their own stock. Thousands of ordinary Enron employees, many of whom had been encouraged to put their retirement savings into company stock, had no idea what was happening. The fall that shook a nation in October 2001, Enron disclosed a massive write-down of over $1 billion. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched a formal investigation. The story quickly unraveled. By the end of November 2001, the stock had collapsed from over $90 a share to less than $1. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. At the time, it was the largest bankruptcy filing in the history of the United States, listing over $63 billion in assets. The human cost was staggering. Around 20,000 employees lost their jobs. Thousands watched their retirement savings vanish overnight, wiped out because so much of their wealth was tied up in company stock that was now worthless. Shareholders filed a $40 billion lawsuit and eventually received partial compensation of $7.2 billion, a fraction of what was lost. The criminal trials that followed sent shockwaves through corporate America. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted on multiple counts of securities, fraud, and conspiracy, and sentenced to over 24 years in prison, along with a massive financial penalty. Kenneth Lay was convicted on 10 counts of securities fraud before dying of a heart attack in the summer of 2006, months before he was due to be sentenced. Andrew Fastow pleaded guilty and served 6 years in prison. Arthur Andersen was found guilty of obstruction of justice, and by the time any legal appeals were resolved, had already lost virtually all of its clients and ceased operating. One of the most prestigious accounting firms in the world simply ceased to exist. Collateral damage from the lies it had chosen to protect, the aftermath reshaped the entire regulatory landscape. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 was signed into law specifically in response to the Enron collapse. It imposed strict new rules on public companies, required executives to personally certify the accuracy of financial statements, and increased criminal penalties for financial fraud. Enron did not just destroy itself. It forced an entire system to reckon with how deep the rot could grow when power was left unchecked. The story of Enron is not simply the story of greed. It is the story of what happens when a company becomes so convinced of its own invincibility that it stops believing the rules apply to it. It is the story of what happens when the people inside an institution learn that ambition matters more than honesty, and when the institutions meant to hold them accountable decide to look away. Every era produces companies that feel too powerful to fail. History keeps delivering the same answer. No company is. The fall always comes, and when it does, it is the ordinary people, the workers and the shareholders who trusted, who pay the highest price.